Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Central Potato PhD, and I'm making a video for you today on how to use OBS's audio processing features, what they call filters. Let's take a look. I've got my microphone here, and I'm going to open up filters. So let's clear out all this cruft. I'm going to keep these because these are the settings I actually want. I've disabled them here, and you can disable any filter that you have with the I button, just like you enable or disable sources or scenes in your scenes with OBS already. The first one that I want to show you is the gain. Gain is a tool that it just basically means volume. So you can turn the volume of a source up or down. So if you have a source that's just extra quiet, you can already adjust the gain downwards. Like you can lower the volume in your audio mixer here, right over in this panel where you see the level meters and stuff. And you can do that here too. Like right now I'm getting pretty quiet. Hello! Or you can turn it up. And this is something that you can't do from the audio mixer. You can't make it any louder. So let's remove that gain plugin because you understand what that does. Now, this brings up an important point. If you're doing ASMR, and this is like cardinal sin of ASMR, but it happens in a lot of other things too. Like imagine you're doing an ASMR stream and you fall over in your chair and your mic comes with you and just bashes you in the head. Your listeners' ears are ringing. Here's what you can do about that. There's a tool called the limiter. You set a point at which you're not going to let it get any louder. So if I turn this down, you're going to see what this is doing. And I can talk as loud as I want, and it will distort, but it will stop it from getting any louder. And then there's also, that's what the threshold does. The threshold is the point where you say, okay, nothing louder than this can come through. If you set your threshold to something like -3 dB, and this is probably a good time to talk about dB. So dB is like a relative measurement. And a good rule of thumb is that 3 dB is twice the volume. And consequently, -3 dB is half the volume. So when you're saying, well, I don't want it to get louder than half of something, well, what's that something? Well, in this case, it's dB full scale. 0 dB is like, this is the loudest that a sound can possibly get as represented by your computer. If you say, I don't want it to get any louder than my computer can actually represent, okay, that's pretty loud. We probably want to turn that down. My preferred is about -6 dB. So that's just into the red. You just want to throw this on like everything. Put a limiter on everything because you really don't, like there's never a point where you want it to get like stupidly insanely loud, unless maybe you have like some scare alert and you're like, okay, I do want this to actually scare my viewers too. But unless you want to do that, just put a limiter on everything. Pick a limit, whether it's -3 dB, -6, -9, and then your stream will just never get louder than that. And that's a big boon to your listener. Now the release, this is a control that means how fast do you let go of this? You've clamped down on the volume. Okay, cool. How fast does it let up on? It's kind of jarring if it doesn't let go of it slowly. The default release of 60 milliseconds it's probably fine, but if you want, if it feels like it's coming up too slowly, you can set the release faster, or you can set it to a longer time if you want it to come back more gradually. We'll just get this out of the way now, is invert polarity. There is this sort of push and pull that makes up any sound. If you have two opposing pushes that push against each other, that makes them both more powerful. So if you have a push and a pull at the same exact time, the same exact magnitude, what you get is silence. Like if I had two microphones like this, I might be running into a situation where one is recording a push at the same time the other is recording a pull, just because of their positioning. Now, invert polarity, all this is going to do is convert that push to pull. So if you have a multiple mic setup and your voice is like weirdly quiet, or whatever else you're miking up is like weirdly quiet, you might consider inverting the polarity and seeing if that fixes it. The next tool I want to talk about, the first tool you'll probably want to use in your chain is the noise gate. The way that this works is you have this tool, a noise gate, that denies any sounds that are quieter than the threshold you set and allows any sounds that are louder than it. The idea being that usually when you have some sort of noisy background, the noise is not as loud as everything else. Now, I've got an air filter in here. You can hear the air filter in the background if I turn off the noise gate and I'm quiet for a moment. Now, when I turn this on, you hear nothing when I talk. But when I talk, you can hear it, and you can hear the air filter. So it's not taking out the noise, it's simply defining a minimum volume level. So like our limiter defines a maximum volume level, this defines a minimum volume level. Now, your limiter, you're going to want to put that last in your chain, but the noise gate, you're almost certainly going to want to put that first, unless you're using noise suppression. So let me explain the options on this. You can set two different thresholds here. For me, I say I want this to open up when it reaches negative 27 dB. When I talk in a quiet voice, I can easily beat negative 27 dB. When I talk, I'm definitely going to get over this threshold. And I might get quieter than it at times, but I'm never going to get softer than this threshold, the closed threshold, which is also higher than the noise. So you want to play with these levels so that when you speak, your voice triggers the gate to open. And when you keep talking, even if you talk quietly, you're not going to be above this threshold. And you also want to set the threshold so that the close is above the level of noise. So you pretty much just want to set the close threshold above the noise and let that be it. And then make sure that the open threshold is somewhere higher than that, enough that your voice can trigger it. We also have what's called attack, which is how fast does it come on. It can be a little bit jarring if we have a 0 attack time, and I'll show you what that sounds like real quick. This is what it sounds like. Bang on out of nowhere, just no warning, just on. Ugh. So that's not ideal. We want it to sound a little bit more musical than that. It comes up a little bit slower. So I played with it until I found something that sounds natural but doesn't cut off too much of my beginning speech or whatever. And then a hold time is like, okay, the gate's open. How long do we wait in case there's more audio coming that passes the open threshold or that is higher than the closed threshold? 200 milliseconds, that's 0.2 seconds. That's not a whole lot of time, but it's enough that if I'm like a little bit quiet, if I'm pausing between my words, the gate still doesn't close because it's still kind of like hanging on, waiting for me to say something else. And then release time, just like we had before. If you listen closely right now, you will hear the air filter kind of fade out as I stop talking. So you'll hear it boom, kind of gradually close. Now I'm going to set this release time to 0 so you can hear what it sounds like when it slams shut and why we want a release time longer than 0. So now I'm going to talk. Boom. Out. So you can hear a little bit of air filter and then nothing. So we're going to set that back to the 150. To set these, you're just going to want to, again, play with these times until it sounds pleasant, right? It doesn't sound jarring. Let me talk to you about noise suppression real quick. Nothing to configure here except, do you want it to use less CPU or do you want it to sound better? Now, I don't like the sound of noise suppression. It's going to try to take the sound and manipulate it to pull out the noise. If it's getting like a constant hum, like or whatever, and if you are getting that, maybe noise suppression is for you, right? So if you have like a really loud air conditioner or something like that, or if you have like a ground hum or a whine from like some piece of electronics that you can't turn off for whatever reason, right? You've got this constant like humming or whining or whatever. The problem is that anytime you have sound that it occurs in that same sort of pitch range, it's going to be pulled out too, or it's at least going to be severely reduced, and it makes everything sound less natural. You probably notice that there is a change in the quality of my voice, and especially if I change to this low quality, you're going to notice a definite difference in the way that my voice sounds. And I think it's better if you can reduce the noise by just turn off the TV in the background, or if you need to get a power cleaner, there are power conditioning things that you can get that will take the hum out of a poorly built electrical system. So let's get rid of that real quick, and let's talk about the next thing in the chain. What a compressor does, it's very similar to what a limiter does. It controls volume based on how loud something coming in is. And what it does when it engages is not to keep the volume at that threshold level and exactly that. It turns down the volume of everything that exceeds that. Every time the volume gets too loud, it turns down the volume. Here we have a ratio of 10:1, which is actually kind of excessive. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply this compressor, and I'm going to turn the threshold way down, and you're going to be able to hear when I talk that it's really just crunching my voice. And it sounds unpleasant. I'm seeing my voice is getting above -20 pretty regularly. So I'm going to say above -20 as I watch the meters. That's going to be good. And I want my ratio to be probably no more than a 4:1. 4:1 is like mid-range compression. 2:1 or 1.5:1 is better. Now, what this means is for every 2 dB that I go over -20, it's actually only going to allow 1 dB through. So the next thing is attack. Attack is how fast the compressor applies. This is actually way more important to how things sound than you would imagine. Now, if you want something to be just totally crunched, you want to use it more like a limiter, but not as aggressive as a limiter, a very fast attack. What's going to happen here is that every sound that I make is going to be immediately compressed. And you'll notice that when I say like a B or a P or a T, it's gonna it's really just gonna like dampen that, right? Like ba pa da ba ba ba. There's not like a pop to it. Now, if I set my attack much longer, the pop 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 pop, a little bit of the sound comes through before it clamps down. Now, anything lower than, let's say, 50 milliseconds, and you're going to start to clamp down on that. So here you're still getting the pop, 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 pop. And I try to set around, somewhere around like 20 milliseconds or something like that. Because this lets a little bit of the pop, pop, pop through. And so that my voice sounds more natural, but it doesn't really clamp down on it in the same way that an instant attack would. It's also not going to be so late on that it's like as I'm talking, as I'm exceeding the ratio, that it's going to be killing that. Then release, you already know what release does. If it feels like whenever you talk, it's like and it sort of comes back like it's pumping and breathing and like swelling after you finish talking, the release is too slow. The last thing, output gain, you just have a gain control after all of this is finished. Let's talk about the expander. While a compressor takes everything above a threshold and turns it down, the expander is going to take everything below a threshold and turn it up. This can be really nice if you're doing like a lot of whispering and then talking, and the volume isn't going to change that much. The thing about the expander is that while it is going to make it so that you can clearly hear when I'm like whispering and stuff, I kind of like that it's actually quieter when I'm whispering, versus it like trying to balance me out and turn things up and turn things down dynamically to keep me at the same level all of the time, which I think kind of is a little bit boring. So I'm not actually going to use this. But all the other things are the same here. Threshold, you understand what that does. That's the cutoff point where it does or doesn't apply. Ratio, you already know what that does. Attack and release, output gain, you already know what all of that does. The last thing is detection. RMS basically means average over time. Something that you might not have noticed about the audio meter in OBS. Take a look at the audio meter here. You see this little black bar that's bouncing around here? You can barely see it. I'm going to turn off my webcam display here real quick so you can see it better. But do you see this little black bar that's bouncing around here? That is your RMS level. That is your average volume level. So if you've ever wondered what's that thing floating around there, that's your average level. So if you want to do your detection based on RMS, which is sort of like an averaging, that's what you want to look for in the meters. That little black bar dancing around there. Peak is what you're seeing like the actual colored bars do. But let's talk just briefly about the order of things and why we've chosen this specific order. If we put our expander before our compressor, what that's going to mean for us is that it might expand stuff up into and through the compressor's threshold. So then we have something like turning up just to be turned back down. Or let's say that we have much worse, our expander before our noise gate. Well, now we're turning up all the noise. So you definitely don't want the noise gate to come after the expander. Because if you're expanding that noise upward, then your signal level, your actual speaking, and your noise level are so much closer. And it's going to be way harder to get a good gate level that works for, however you're using it, right? So you want the noise gate first because that's going to cut out all the noise before it hits the compressor, before it hits the expander. That's definitely a reason why, if you're going to use an expander or if you're going to use a compressor, because if you're going to compress and then turn everything up after that, that's going to create a situation where you're turning up the noise too. And so as much of the noise as you can carve out before that, better. Let's say that we put our limiter before our compressor. We have, this 3 dB gain being applied by our compressor, and it pushes that louder. And then if we had our limiter like right at the start, well, okay. Well, now our actual limit is 3 dB higher than we set in our limiter. So the limiter is going to be your last line of defense. It's always going to come last because you want that to respond to your sound after it's already gone through all of the other processing. So definitely, as you're setting this chain up, think about how are the different plugins going to respond to everything. My general advice to you is always start with your noise removal. Start with your noise gate, or if you're using noise suppression, or if you're using both. And you're probably going to want to put your noise suppression before a gate if you're using both. So noise suppressor, then the gate, then a compressor, then an expander, or you can do expander compressor, that's fine too. Any sort of makeup gain that you want to apply after that, and then at the end, your limiter. And I guess, throw in your invert polarity if you have to use that right around the beginning as well. Thanks for watching, and if you're sticking around this long, you might as well hit the like and subscribe. And now I'm an official YouTuber because I said the phrase. Thank you for watching.